Light, a show that explores Earth and sky and the spirits that reside there through art, literature, magic, culture, and creative action. I'm your host, Chris. Enjoy. We are back here to talk about the moon moving through the 28 shapes of the lunar zodiac, commonly referred to as the Lunar Mansions. If you've listened to us before in the past few months, every 28-ish days, we try to get this done by the first Lunar Mansion. We're a little late this round, but every 28 days when the moon enters the first Lunar Mansion, we talk about the moon transiting through the 28 shapes and anything notable that happens. The automatic notable things that occur are the two lunations, because there's always going to be a new moon and a full moon every 28 days. So starting with the first Lunar Mansion, which would be in the tropical zodiac, 0 degrees Aries to 12 degrees and 51 minutes Aries. When the moon gets to that place, we discuss what it's going to look like for her to go around. We situate ourselves in the list from the prayer to Mene from the Greek magical papyri, which mentions 21 animal shapes and 7 cult objects related to Hecate. And we center ourselves there in the syncretic period, and kind of reach out from that kind of Hellenistic era, seated in kind of like the Greco-Egyptian magic of the age that kind of consolidates various currents flowing through astrological, magical, Orphic, the mysteries, Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, etc., into the Arabic traditions of the Lunar Mansions, the nakshatras from Indian astrology. We look into the grimoire tradition, in particular the Grimorium Verum, which seems to be organized around the mansions, and sometimes how the Grimorium Verum is syncretized into the traditions in Kimbanda. We also reach over into just beginning to reach over and to try to make sense of how to incorporate the Chinese Lunar Mansions, which is a bit tricky. All of this kind of creates a situation where we have to deal with tropical or sidereal or other considerations, like the Chinese also look at it from a terrestrial perspective, flattened to the horizon as they use it in Feng Shui, and then how things overlap as far as degrees of the zodiac, or if we're just counting sequentially, as they don't match up sidereal and tropical. So sometimes would you fix for that? Other times would you just kind of say the 9th Lunar Mansion here, the 9th Lunar Mansion there? All of it is worth considering. So we look at it from multiple different angles and see how all of these various traditions of 28ism seem to overlap and point towards commonalities and synchronicities. So that's how we function. And so we're just going to kind of get going here as
I would just like to add, for those of you joining us for the first time, the 28 places, or the 28 mention, have to do with basically just looking at where the moon is transiting in the sky and basically dividing the sky in 28 sections. So that's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we'll get there's 7 mansions between solstice and equinox points. So there's sort of 4 sets of 7. And yeah, so as we discuss, we'll see these various considerations become important. But the looking at 28 might be older than looking at 12. We see from some histories of lists of counting the moon and so on. So the new moon, we're going to get pretty early in the month. So we're going to kind of jump right ahead and start talking about the new moon in Cancer, which we're going to get at 18 degrees Cancer, in the 9th lunar mansion, which in the PGM list is Serpent.
And so, yeah, just to specify again, that's me specifying. The Serpent mentioned, the 9th mention, is between 25 Cancer and 8 degrees of Leo. So that section is attributed to the 9th lunar mention.
Oh wait, no, isn't that Horse?
Oh, yeah, that's Horse. Actually, that's, sorry, I'm looking at the full moon notes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, so Serpent is between 12 Cancer and 25 Cancer. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, and that's in the most commonly considered system of the Arabic lunar mansions, that is al-Tarf, which means the eyes. The image of which in the Picatrix is says a man with hands covering eyes. The election is for destroying crops, unfortunate journeys, evil division, hatred, defense from attack, and the talisman for causing infirmity. So this is overall usually considered a destructive mansion from that tradition, which is kind of what got us going kind of with this research and delving deeper into other possible sources for looking at the mansions. As I noticed a couple of years ago that if you look at what the Picatrix says the mansions are good for or bad for, or what you can support and what you can destroy, etc., the 9th lunar mansion seems to be all negative. And if you sort through from various traditions, its significations, it seems to be an overtly feminine mansion. And we get a similar thing with the 15th lunar mansion, which would follow the autumnal equinox in 0 degrees Libra, a sign on the tropical solar zodiac ruled by Venus, whereas, Cancer ruled by the moon, the 2 female planets in the traditional 7. And that also is mostly considered negative. And so then kind of searching around, and it's like, well, this could have to do with the attitudes within the Picatrix and within the culture that the Picatrix was matrixed within, which, is Neoplatonic and is kind of is fundamentalist theologically. And then you see the objectives mentioned in the elections and the talismans, and they're mostly related to control and domination and the acquisition of land and wealth and things like that. And so these more feminine positions might have to do with something that is antithetical to those concepts of control.
Yeah, and it's interesting to consider that it's actually in the really procreative sign of Cancer that we find this mentioned. So there's something, feminine, female, procreative, but it's like the untamable sort of feminine. I think, from the nakshatra perspective, that's often how it gets explained, like the lunar mention 9th, just this sort of untamable feminine energy. And maybe that's why also it got associated with destructive forces.
That is how they speak about it in the nakshatra literature, as like kind of primordial, untamable feminine energy.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. And it gets compared, because the 9th nakshatra, which is Ashlesha, gets compared to Nagas sometimes, but sometimes Sarpas. And the difference between Nagas and Sarpas is basically just, Nagas are like beneficial serpent power. It's like sort of higher vibration of serpent power, versus Sarpas, which is more like the snake that wraps itself around you and chokes you to death.
Yeah.
And they say that that particular nakshatra, which is associated with serpent, can have like the lower expression of Sarpa, or the higher expression of nagas,
Oh,
depending.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Shlesha means translates to something like the embrace, or you see sometimes the clinging star, and the symbol of that nakshatra being like a coiled serpent, and this is like kind of a direct hit with the PGM where you see like the ninth mansion is serpent, and then the ninth mansion in the nakshatras is also speaks of serpent.
Yeah.
The images is of a serpent, but I think nagas is like more specifically when like a cobra as which kind of snake, and so there's a lot of resonance there with the nodes, and overlapping at that, like this is the solstitial gate, the summer solstice, being up there in Cancer, and then the kind of like the overlay with like the equinoxes and the solstices with the nodes and the axis of the nodes and the bends of the nodes. So there's something like, because it is the, you know, the moon's sign in a solar sense, but it's also, yeah, you can just see that it's like it's that gateway of incarnation and how we think of it from you know, when Sirius, that the Egyptians called Sothis, which we talked about this last time we recorded. Probably we'll talk about this every time we record, but that, you know, the Egyptians would think of that as like when that was the star that was heliacal rising, was the time of the flooding of the Nile and the you know, the upwelling of the waters that made the land moist and led to the fecundity that would come from the crops. But it is that's not really a time of stabilization and control. It's a time of flood. You know, it's like this is going to bring life, but it's the like, if you know, monsoon season or something like that is not a time where things are like tight and under control. You know.
Yeah, speaking of the nodes, just briefly, some of the information on the ninth nakshatra I got from Freedom Cole book called Science of Light. And he speaks in that particular mention, he speaks, or nakshatra, he speaks of the lunar nodes representing serpents and the sort of parallel with Rahu and Ketu. And just again, he speaks of like the higher expression of nagas, which would be represented by Ketu, versus Rahu representing more the Sarpa, lower vibration of snakes. And Sarpa, as he says, are sinful, cheating, and have power of deceiving with their speech and their split tongue. And, you know, again, like it kind of parallels with the definitions we have from the Arabic lunar mansion. You know, there's something dangerous and poisonous, destructive, if it's, you know, depending on how it's used.
Yeah, which we know that like directly, you know, even the Picatrix will say, like, I think the first the information on the mansions and the Picatrix is in two books within the Picatrix, one in the beginning and one in the end. And the first one says from Indian wisdom, and the second one says from Pliny, which probably means more Greek material, but it's all kind of Arabic astrology, and especially this magical material is a mix. But Al-Biruni going down and writing his big treatise on Indian culture, which included their astrology and especially their calendars and timekeeping, came back up right around the same time period to the Arabic world and when the Picatrix was penned. So we know that they were drawing tons of information directly from the Indian nakshatras at that point, and then kind of remixing it and reorganizing it into this magical material, which is like, in this case, kind of for better or for worse, because we see it just kind of just some of the information, just like almost word for word what they might say about the negative aspects of the nodal influence here, but not everything else.
Yeah, totally. So, you know, do you want to talk a little bit about what this new moon in the ninth mansion called Serpent could potentially mean this month? I think, you know, because we have Mars and Venus coming to their conjunction like just a few days later, I think it's like a super, like it's a highly relational time, and it might be like very like desires might be highlighted, less objectivity, more subjectivity, more sensation, maybe more passion too, because of the placement of this new moon and then the conjunction of Mars and Venus a few days later.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I also, when I was going through for the regular forecast, and looking at the regular like kind of solar astrology forecast and looking at how everything was going to play out, the beginning of the month is like so jolty and kind of like we have that activating like Mars opposition to Saturn, and then all these aspects to Uranus, and it's there's this like push pull and kind of like jumping of groove to like forward, almost like skipping a link or something, and it's moving things ahead in like a jarring way. And then after that sequence, after about a week into July, we get this new moon, and it's almost like this time of kind of like seeking refreshment and lubrication, being like, all right, if things are going to be this friction filled, we're going to need things to be pretty lubricated, and we're going to need to like cool down and have rest every once in a while. But then when you look at the deeper meanings of stuff by looking into the lunar zodiacal kind of resonance here, we talk about Cancer being a place of like food and drink, but also kind of philosophy. All the water signs have an element of being meaningful. But like at this section of it, it's what kind of meaning, what kind of archetypes are expressing, and what's resonating. And it's not really the very first part of Cancer where we get 0 to 12 degrees with Wolf Mansion, but it's Serpent instead. So it is that like the deeper kind of resonating meanings of what it means for incarnation to happen, for this like the primordialism. We get Serpent here, but we also get if you look at the Grimorium Verum, this is where Astaroth would fall, which kind of relates back to Inanna, Ishtar, Astaroth, like ancient goddesses of love and sexuality and kind of procreation in the sense of almost like king making, like lineage of deified, like human born, God on earth and things like that. But kind of going back to the point where like all ancestors are shared in this like primordialism of like the original kind of world egg, the womb world that's like kind of the universe's procreative womb. So there's, I don't know, there's something deeply resonant there with these like everything that like the flooding of the Nile, like what overflows. Even the Chinese mansion that would fall here would be like, is the well, it's like where the water comes from, like where the water wells up from. It's loaded with images of water and rivers and lakes and seas. Like even in the nakshatra, it's like the Nagas are associated with being from Patala, like the netherworld, or sort of like the underworld, but it's where the body from bodies of waters, like all kind of conjoining. I don't know if I'm making sense here. I'm like laying down some archetypal expressions, but I don't know, like we kind of have to jointly put it all together and be like, what does that mean to be like emanating from primordialism,
Yeah, well, I think Venus is going to be separating from an opposition with Saturn on the 6th, so just 3 days before the new moon. So there's really something about a line, kind of like, Venus opposing Saturn is like finding the sweet spot in winter. Basically, it's kind of like, okay, where can I find pleasure within the limits of what's possible? But then 3 days later, there's this really juicy new moon, I guess, but it's also kind of like, what's your pleasure? Where's your pleasure? And, how does that fit in, like, with the current, like, astrology that we find ourselves in? Is it's not as fertile, I guess, because of the aspects that Saturn are making this month, and Venus separating from Saturn, there's like a wild oscillation between desired form versus like material form, and there might be something about just like finding pleasure in the familiar and kind of connecting with that instead.
Yeah, I was definitely seeing that in the like solar astrology for sure, like that it was like, okay, like this is a good time to like really get basic. But then
basic, that's definitely.
But then like with there could be, because where the resonances emanate from the lunar zodiac tend to be more like in your kind of dreams and in your subconscious and in creativity and in those kind of like more magical contemplations. And so those moments where you're pausing outside of, I mean, you could be poolside with your family being a basic bitch, but then like be like pause for a second and you're like watching birds fly by and you get put into that anomalous state, and what comes through might be like, oh, this cocktail is really hitting the spot, like it's really wetting my whistle, but like I need to drink the ambrosia, that's kind of like protected by the world snake, like where am I going to get it, where can I get it from, not with like any necessary, because it's a new moon, not with any like advanced urgency to get up out of your chair and leave the family reunion and go do that, but there might be some recognition that down the line you're going to need to reconnect with the original kind of procreative waters and drink of deeper wells.
Yeah, totally. And because it's a new moon, also it's the beginning of a new cycle, it's still very invisible, but it connects to desires. But I feel like there's something kind of premature or childish or immature about the desires, and I guess that's a lot of the information on the ninth nakshatra is also associated with that. It's kind of like desires, but it's the premature desires, it's the very selfish desires, so there's something kind of like that emerging, but it might not be completely conscious.
Yeah, it might not be sensical, and I think that's partly why the Picatrix sees it as a place that's like kind of good for nothing, because it's so womb, it's so like serpent and womb and DNA, and what the DNA has to say, it's totally like thinking with your hormones, and like
the urge to have a baby, even though logically it doesn't make any sense or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like that, what Astaroth wants to do, and often being like being compulsive of kind of like sexuality, and maybe for like because your DNA wants to procreate, but like the situations that puts you in aren't necessarily about children, but like but it also creates all of these hormonal fluctuations, like the flooding of the Nile like brings in really like
sensory overload.
Yeah, sensory overload. And it's like it's the womb, so it's later on, like in the pre-modern period, when like like when we say like hysterectomy and like having like the female reproductive system organs like removed, like hysteria is from the same root. And what hysteria originally meant in the pre-modern world was they thought that your womb was wandering around your body and making you crazy, and like
there might be something about just the unpredictability of desires too, and kind of like like I guess the negative connotation that sometimes come with this mention would be like kind of being afraid of your own sort of instinctual self or desires,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Like, yeah, like you're not making sense because you're feeling too procreative, you're feeling, which includes the word creative, feeling too generative. And I know we talked about this a long time ago, but Venus always gets the like, when in the breakdown of like, well, Mars is this and this, and Venus always gets creativity, and we don't always list that with the moon, but the moon is certainly creative, it's procreative, and it's generative, and it does accomplish like manifesting creative works, but in a different way, than being just kind of like artful. It's not by being aesthetic oriented, but feeling compelled to generate something, you
Yeah,
know.
there's really a compulsion here, I think, and there's something destructive about compulsion sometimes, and just the compulsive sort of act of creation sometimes is mixed with destruction or something, you know, like we were talking before, just like the like birth itself, how like actually gory it is, you know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that's weird that we fell upon the word compulsion, because we get Astaroth here, who's one of the, in the grimoires, is one of the three superiors, and the way that it's thought of that this type of goetic magic works is the spirit you want to do something for you does it because you're coming with the superior, and they kind of push upon that spirit. But the word that gets thrown around a lot is compulsion. Like, it compels the spirit. The name of Astaroth will compel the spirit you want to do something to do it, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's
So your desires are could be compelling you to do things from like a place that where you're not necessarily like rationally aware or something.
mhm. Yeah, you're possessed by your own serpent, you know.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good image. I like that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting the way, you know, this is like lines up to near the solstice, the top of the zodiac, to like Cancer, the theme of Mundi. It's obviously an important place, like Egyptian Sothis, and it's like keys into Astaroth and like Inanna and king making and generation and incarnation. And then it kind of makes sense that we get the like the in the grimoires too, like the four kings, like the directional kings, like east, west, north, south, and this kind of solstice equinox directionality, really keying into the place where kings are incarnated. And there's something about, I don't know if we want to say kind of from there, I'm kind of trying to segue the whole abundancia.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, it fits because Jupiter is still in Pisces. I think it is going like it's a very juicy place in the zodiac, and plus that period when the new moon happened, like Jupiter is still in Pisces also. It's really juicy. Um
But the abundance signature came from our automatic writing, to remind the listener. But like, another thing we do in this research is uh, every night when we do kind of an automatic writing and trance drawing to collect more information of what the moon is laying out at the time. It's almost as if the world is just, reality is just submerged in wherever the moon is, whatever shape the moon is passing through, as we exist in the sublunar realm. But over the course of time, in doing that every night, every time we'd come around to this place, there was this symbol of abundance.
it was
Which,
more in Wolf mentioned, but it's kind of overlapping with Serpent. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and those two are like kind of blurry in that sense too, because of that. Where does this, like, does the solstice initiate the moment the sun enters Cancer, or is it like this period of flooding and light, you know?
Yeah.
But I wanted to mention that, and we should talk a little bit more about that, because as far as like what all echoes through the entire month or cycle of 28 shapes this round, we see this kind of almost thing with abundance being an echo. There's a lot going on in the solar astrology that says a lot of different things about the dynamics. It's a very dynamic, kind of jarring month, and there's some sweet spots or whatever. But I kept coming across, when looking from the lunar perspective, that these kind of the expressions of abundance, like here and there, that might be something to direct magic towards and contemplation towards, like on a more embodied and subtle lunar level.
Yeah, I mean it's a new moon too. Usually, you know, it's the beginning of something. You plant seeds. It's a really fertile sort of place also to do that. And it might relate to more desires than more like a sort of objective rational trajectory. You know, it could be something more felt or embodied. It could be through movement or something like that, you know, setting intention through motion, through like actually moving your body or something.
In such a way to like nourish what you're trying to, what the serpent is possessing you to procreate.
Well, even, yeah, or even just to kind of translate the language, you know, just to kind of like maybe understand what it wants, like what this energy wants.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good way to think about it. I mean, that's why we get Astaroth here, from the Verum, and how that reflects back to Inanna, and then we get Serpent here, and it's like it's these Cancerian waters. It really is like the body, and the way to understand it. Yeah, the way to speak to it and dialogue with it might be just from moving. I mean, whenever we get serpents, we get kind of like movement imagery, movement archetypes, like kind of like dance, writhing around, trance. You know, you always
Yeah,
see that
exactly.
together.
Absolutely. Instead of like, especially with the heavy Saturn Venus opposition just a few days before that, we might like completely be in like caught up in rationalizing what is the right thing to do versus what we want to do, you know. And there's a lot of want and desires that are not rational, you know.
Yeah, yeah, totally. You're like, that's what I want, but I'm not even going to tell anyone that. I'm not even going to tell myself that.
Yeah, I
um,
think, well, we spend our whole existence doing that just to be able to function, I think.
yeah, totally. Um, do you want to read a section of writing from the automatic writing that
Yeah,
corresponds
sounds good.
here?
So that was from last year, actually. Okay. A crust has formed on the surface of the skin like dry salt crystals in the heat. A vase, a flower, a promise, a callus. Fragments on the floor of ancient temples swept by light into oblivion. Red lips speculating on the weight of temperance. Light rises, night falls, blue mountains on the azure of time.
And a lot of like chalice comes over and over here. Like
Yeah, I didn't know how to say that in English, actually.
okay.
It came out of me, but I don't know how that word.
Yeah, yeah, because I see here in your notes you wrote that we'll get a proliferation of fangs and teeth and blood and chalices and eggs and crosses when we come
In the
across this place.
drawings, yeah,
Yeah.
usually in the drawings, that's like the most repetitive theme. I always get the gates, I think, because that's, you know, Cancer with the celestial gate being there. There's always two pillars and like over a dozen of drawings more. And then, yeah, always bloods. It's usually very bloody and fangy. Like it's kind of like overly protective and
Hmm.
fertile. But there's definitely something kind of being guarded too, usually when in the drawings that comes through. But and it's moody, it's temperamental. I mean, we say that about Cancer, but specifically Serpent. I feel like it's really moody. Some months, you know, it's like, oh, okay, it's like it feels like this, and in other months it's like, you know, it's like
Yeah.
completely a different, more aggressive vibe. So I feel like it's actually very temperamental, very moody place. Which makes sense because desires and you know our instinctual self fluctuates like dramatically, and that's why we can't really rationalize or you know rationalize with it or discuss with it like in a sort of straightforward way.
Yeah. Yeah, I get a lot of like liquid gold and kind of interior of like dark spaces, and kind of like yeah, the hooks, and like it's very like spiny hooks and fang like things, and yeah, it's, you know, it being a serpent, it almost, what you were saying reminds me almost like the those flags that are like don't tread on me with the serpent, with like the snake. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's like kind of like how um that sensitivity, like it's like this snake is just going to be here, but if you go over and step near it or on it, it's just going to bite you, you know?
yeah. And if you think of like Kundalini energy or something, it's like Yeah, you might have like the best orgasm, or you might just be driven mad.
Yeah, yeah, to
You know?
permanently. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. It's like it might kill you, or you might find ecstasy, or you might die, you know?
yeah, yeah, totally. Um, yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, that deluge effect, that flood effect, you know. And then I lost my train of thought. I had something else to say,
We
but
can, yeah, we
yeah,
can
let's
jump to the full moon actually.
yeah, I think that covers it, and I think we'll loop back through to some of these significations because I saw some things um
Yeah, that were
like that were echoing. Do you want to go straight to the full moon, or do you want to go through the Venus Mars conjunction because that happens in between?
oh, okay, sure, if you want to talk about it a little bit.
I think it's interesting because that it occurs on the 13th of July. Um, I think around 19 degrees tropical Leo. Venus and Mars conjoin, and right beforehand, the morning before, the moon actually conjoins them as they're becoming very tight in their conjunction. So the entire night sect is consolidated for a minute in this one part of the zodiac. So it seemed like it was worth talking about as far as like a lunar zodiacal uh, kind of discussion of what happens within this like
Yeah,
28-day month.
totally.
Because
The moon is just like new out of the serpent mention.
yeah, yeah, it's just a couple days.
Yeah,
And yeah, and it's like the Venus is our desires and what we're attracted to and what we resonate with, and the moon is like what we want and what we need, and what would nourish us, and our emotions and intuitions. And then Mars is an odd one to be in the night sect rather than the day sect, but it is like our instincts, like it's our critical responses, what gets us like hot and angry, or like lucidly like we're in danger, we have to do something. So it's like all of that, like that, it's all of the subjective faculties all consolidated to one spot. It's more interesting that even the moon comes through right at that time too. And this is in the 11th lunar mansion, which the Picatrix calls Al Zubra, the main. This mansion extends from 8 degrees 34 minutes of Leo to 21 degrees 25 minutes of Leo. The Picatrix says it's a man riding a lion, holding a lance in his right hand, or holding the lion's ear in his left. But the PGM says that this is she goat, which is really interesting because the she goat that they're likely talking about is from the Greek mythology, Greek religion, the goat Almathea, who was the nurse of Zeus. Well, Zeus was being hidden from Kronos because Kronos wanted to swallow him. So Zeus was raised in secret in a cave and drank the milk of this goat until he was old enough to get out of there. Which kind of, there's some extensions of this womb world, this procreation that we're talking about in Serpent, kind of consolidating a couple days later into Leo in a month that's very like jagged, being like, oh, well, we need on the solar level, being like, oh, this has been a crazy week. We need to go basic bitch and just like drink cocktails and go for a swim. But then on the deeper level, we might be like, oh, we really need to like feed what we're possessed to procreate. And then a few days later, there's this consolidation of the whole subjective set of the traditional planets around this, like, we almost need to like hide something. We almost need to hide out here and do some like behind the scenes deals. We need to do some sort of exchange in secret to feed this baby that's possessing us.
yeah, it's interesting because so Venus, Mars, and the moon are together. It's on the 12th. It's in a broad opposition to Saturn and squaring Uranus. So it kind of ties into the Saturn Uranus square of this year. I know like we're talking about the lunar zodiac on its own, but I think this story ties
Oh,
into
totally.
this because Uranus is square Venus and Mars basically, and Saturn is opposing it, So there's a lot of obstacle course to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sort of things dodging it. Like it's not easy. And I think that's why basic bitch is probably the best trajectory because it's like, oh, the pressure is on.
But I feel like it's like basic bitch is the best trajectory for the solar stuff, like the events and circumstances of the year, but then that like kind of like deeper creative satisfaction that we talk about with the lunar zodiac, it's like while you're being basic bitch, like at the new moon, sort of recognize what you need to like, what kind of demon you need to like give birth to, and then by the 13th like look about for little strategies to kind of make sure that you can set that thing up to like be born and have resources.
Yeah, interesting. Just because you're saying that because of the placement, the mention it's into, right?
Yeah, because like the talisman is for the favor of kings, and like then like Astaroth from the ninth mansion is for creating kings, for birthing kings. We found that abundance signature through like wolf and serpent, and then in she-goat we get in the Grimorium Verum the spirit Clownuck, who brings riches and brings treasure and merchandise and wares and wealth and wisdom of wealth. Whereas like the nakshatra that falls there, we get which is a Purva Falguni, which the deity associated is Bhaga, the god of marital bliss and but also of prosperity. And you know the first part of the name, like bog, coming from linguistically from like the word for lord, and it has to do with the chieftain that would distribute the goods to the people. Like even in Persian society, like that they would use the same word, like the bog was the lord who would like dole stuff out. And even in the Verum, this is the first spirit after the superiors and their deputies. It's the first of the 18, and it's notes in the Verum that this spirit is beloved by Lucifer, and it's the one that doles out the goods. So it's like it's another almost total direct hit that like the Verum is the West's attempt to talk about the nakshatras and the mansions that was heavily suppressed by the Christian authorities.
In the 11th nakshatra in Freedom Cole's book, on this place where the Venus and Mars conjunct, he says Bhaga presides over love and marriage as a blissful form of the sun god, associated with love, affection, amorous pleasure, sexual passion. This place is invoked for relating to marriage and have a bed as their symbol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's interesting just that Venus and Mars happen there. But you know,
exactly.
I always specify this when I write or talk about Venus and Mars, like joining like this, it's like very hot and sexy and stuff, but it really depends where this place, like fundamentally I think it relates to desires and stuff, but depending on where it falls in natal chart, it might relate to desires related to the house that it's in. It's not necessarily always like sexual desires or love, love, passion and stuff like that. It could be related to love and desires for like a different topic, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like if it's in the 9th house, it could be like desires for travel or desires for education.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think it's oversimplifying to just like associate this sort of pull and drive simply to like sexual passions, even though, you know, that's the first thing we think about.
Yeah, I think like as far as like a daily transit, like I feel like if it happens in your 9th house, it could stir your passions for travel, like the desire to travel and then the impulse to do it. Like Venus could be making you say like, oh, I want to go on a trip to the Mediterranean, and Mars is like, pull the trigger, and you just buy tickets, you know, like and that could be the event. It could have nothing to do with like sexual passion, but probably throughout the course of the day, you'll notice, even if it's outside of your experience, there's some sexual tension. Like it's just kind of like the character of the day, you know?
Yeah, well, when we talk about Mars, I sometimes compare it to libido, which is not always like libido can be transmuted in so many different ways, you know, but it's kind of like your root. It's kind of what drives you, you know, and fundamentally that I think a lot of what drives us is the fact that we're alive. And why are we alive? It's like the creative power, you know, it's that energy. So it's really powerful, like for creating in the world. Mars energy is.
Yeah, and this falls in like the first of the three in the PGM list of the goats, you know, which start to like deal with that, you know, to deal with that kind of like what is libido energy, because they're talking about the goats as in the sense of Dionysus, in the sense of like the satyrs and the Selene, who are the Bacchantes, you know, the ones who are just kind of like Priapus and cohorts, like running around with drink and phalli and like goblets and just being like rowdy, you know. And it's like that expression of libido, like libido energy.
Because so starting with she goat, which begins at 8 Leo, we have she goat, and then we have young horn goat at 4 Virgo, 4 to 17 Virgo, which is the 13th lunar mansion. Then we have he goat, so it goes she goat, kid goat, ass, kid goat, and then he goat. And all of those are really highly kind of procreative charge places in the lunar zodiac.
But less like whereas like with serpent, it's more like procreative, like the DNA, like the organs, the reproductive organs themselves.
It's very like, mystical. Yeah, it's a lot more. It's like the mystical procreation sort of space.
It's like the animal activity, you know. And then this is like Zeus here getting nursed in hiding by this she goat, and then the Kimbanda Eshu de Pedra Negra means of the black stone. And
you're talking about the 11th dimension?
Yeah. And can be is related often to mining, you know. It's like the stone that you pull out of the mine, the stone that you pull out of the dark, the hidden jewel. And it's the same with Zeus as being the hidden jewel, like in the case. And then like the election for bringing the favor of kings and receiving good, and like trade and profit, and increase allies' wealth, etc. I feel like there's something here in this mansion about sort of like behind the scenes deals, you know, like when you're like almost like black market goods, you know, like.
Well, you can think back in summer 2015, Jupiter in Leo conjunct Venus in Leo in this exact mansion, same degrees.
Oh, wow.
Yes, around this time, so 6 years ago. You know, you can just look back and see if anything happened, especially if you have something specific there in Leo, or in the late degrees of Leo, which is she goat.
I feel like with this like proliferation of like abundance, wealth, procreation, and then immediately after bringing food and resource to what you're trying to procreate is like a good time to kind of do on the new moon, do your snake dance to see what you're possessed to procreate. And then on the 13th, kind of it would be almost a good time for almost like kind of tricks type, like results-based sorcery, you know, like sigils and card like spells and like mojo bags and things like that.
Yeah,
you know?
Totally. Yeah.
Like make a deal with the devil, like a little, not a big one, but not like not sign his book, but make, you know what I mean? Like get a little tricks going, you know? It's like definitely like tricks up your sleeve, kind of a like secretly or like, you know, covertly like tip the odds in your favor, you know, but related to what was coming through on the new moon, you know. That's what you want to be like feeding that.
There's definitely continuity. Yeah, there's a continuity there for sure. And Mercury will be trine Jupiter when Venus and Mars conjunct. So that's another beautiful aspect, because Mercury enters Cancer and then immediately trines Jupiter and Pisces. So we have like, again, another push, Mercury and Jupiter being sort of antithesis in some ways, but they're communicating. So it's like the small and the big, the short term and the long term coming together.
Yeah, totally. And then like looking across to Pluto, like being like, it's that another look at that, like the black stone, what's in the mine, what's in the cave, what's the hidden treasure in the earth,
Yeah, totally. Good one.
But yeah, and then it's worth noting just real quick that this Venus-Mars conjunction, we have this here, but then in December when Venus turns retrograde, because she slows down, Mars catches up, then the way their speeds modulate, they're going to spend a lot of January, February, and March moving together, and they'll conjoin twice in Capricorn in that time. And the second time they conjoin in Capricorn, they move across the sign border into Aquarius together, into 0 degrees Aquarius. And that's the degree that when quarantine started, Saturn and Mars stepped across. And then when the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn occurred, it was on the same degree on winter solstice of 2020 when they stepped across. And then so Venus and Mars are doing something here at 19 degrees Leo that they're gonna do the second act of stepping across into the degree of the upcoming moon that happens later in July. The upcoming full moon, I mean.
Oh yeah, that's very interesting how it ties up together. So they're going to be conjoined together where the full moon happens on the 24th.
Yeah, they're on March 5th or 6th. They're going to conjoin at like 0 degrees. They're going to conjoin like at 29 degrees or right on top, like the last degrees of Capricorn, and then step together, moving in unison to 0 degrees, 1 degree Aquarius.
Crazy. And that's where the full moon happens on, late on the 23rd, I guess, on the Pacific, and 24th Eastern. Do you want to jump into that?
Yeah. I guess to echo what we did with the new moon, to kind of give a sample of what we've been doing and how we've been pulling information from automatic writing and trance drawing and such. I'm going to read some writing from last year about this place, which is the 24th lunar mansion, which the PGM has as lightning. Penetration in the old sense, collapsing pylons, toppling towers, the symbols of decay more than inscriptions, singing off the walls and screamed from the parapets, the lingua of the wolf, gray decay but fast and on fire, my future face through everything. I read the universe like an incendiary text, and civilizations fall. My father holds the key and I strike it, and we spiral through the netherworld. With a garland around my neck and a blade as bolt, I fall from darkened clouds. My mouth a symbol of release, no peace. My lips death, the sound of the ground recoiling and steam from sod. The arborist knows me, but from the opposite end. A wish lights up like paper lanterns and explodes like a bomb. Coitus, sudden eruption of jewels. And so that was from, I'm not sure when that was from. You selected that from the writing, and but that was from sometime last year.
Yeah, last summer around this time, I think, too.
Around this time, yeah. And so the Picatrix calls this Sa'ad al-Sa'ud, which I've seen translated multiple ways, but one is the luckiest of the lucky. So right off the bat, we get another hit with this abundance, this bringing of prosperity. And the image here from the Picatrix is a woman breastfeeding. So that's, again, like we get Almathea, the goat, breastfeeding Zeus. Before that, we get this procreative serpent mansion. So now for the third time, we get abundance and procreation.
can we just talk about the degrees of this
Oh
place?
yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So this is lightning, or she wolf, sometimes called she wolves, and it's between 25 Capricorn and 8 Aquarius. And so the full moon will take place in that mention, 24th mention, on July 24th.
Yeah, and so like the election talks about increasing merchandise, again, profit, and the talisman is for increasing herds. So all this same kind of stuff of like increase of wealth, and so it seems to come across like everything notable this month.
Yeah, there's something about this particular section of the lunar zodiac where we start seeing cult objects as opposed to animals. And so, you know, we usually call this place lightning because that's what's in the list of the PGM. I think it's lightning. Yeah.
It's lightning. After, in the switch comes from like deer, then dragoness, then virgin, torch, lightning,
and lightning. And it's interesting to have like this image of women breastfeeding because of the other kind of image associated with this place of the she wolf. So there's like a whole thing with that. But I just want to think about lightning for a second, because there's something really kind of mysterious about this place. I find it comes right after torch, which, torch is a little bit more stable, but when we go into lightning, it's almost just more like a principle, as opposed to something tangible. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but like a lot of the information that came through, especially the writing and stuff, is there's all these form of illumination, something gets lit up.
Well, yeah, it's like a different kind of fire, like the torch being like the torch that Hecate bears, bringing you through the tunnels of the labyrinth, like helping you through the underworld and kind of showing you the way. And then this lightning being like the lightning of epiphany, the lightning of like shocked into initiation, and then can't really unsee what you've seen, like you're not really mortal anymore. You've seen the other side of the curtain.
And usually it's like a pretty, like the Picatrix association with this place is usually pretty positive overall, but I find like it's not as stable, or for delivering, like the delivery of what it represents is not as stable as like some other place. I found that it's kind of, it can show up in a lot of different way because there's a more like spiritual undertow or something like that. It's more human here.
Yeah, I mean, when we say virgin torch, we're talking about probably the Vestal virgins and Hestia, and the torch that's like the eternal flame upon like the sort of like idealized, like always lit altar, and then so we have these kind of these like sort of a virgin initiate kind of figures from the Greek tradition, who might also be who they're trying to incorporate when they're talking about like women breastfeeding here, because they were also known as a how do you say, midwives and kind of wet nurses and things like that.
Yeah, okay, yeah. But when it comes to like thinking about the full moon, like the full moon coming up and how it might show up and stuff, there's so many different layers to it, because the sun is just going to have entered Leo basically, and then the moon opposes from the first degree of Aquarius, which falls here, and it's just shining the light on something really odd to me. I feel like there's something comes to light, but it's odd. Something like that, something that maybe was not meant to be known or revealed, because it's part of this like secretive space or something, or something like that. Because when we talk of full moon, we talk of culmination, we talk of illumination, and we're talking about this illumination taking place in the dimension or the place we call lightning. So there's really something about illumination, but it's an odd illumination.
Yeah, I think it's like, in the initiatory sequence, it's where which would be from the mysteries, that like you can only know the mysteries can't be explained, they have to be experienced, right? And so like in that sequence, when you reach that ecstatic state where you become one with the deity and you get that download, it's sort of at the moment of lightning. And that's where you like, whatever you see in the frescoes or like from the art, because it's not really anything in text, what happens in the mysteries, it's some combination of, sometimes there's entheogenics, sometimes you drink the ergot infused wine and then you have some sort of ritual sex or something, and it's really jarring. You're like, whoa, it's like really takes you out of normal reality, and there's a shock to your system. And then what follows after is garland, and that's like the kind of waiting, in the underworld to be reborn as like an initiate that comes back into the world. And in the initiatory sequence, that might be where your head is just filled with drugs and you're like kind of just have to wait it out for the rest of the trip. But it's post the sort of like moment where you break through that barrier of normality. And so when we see here like the woman breastfeeding, it makes me think of almost like when you see the frescoes of the mysteries and stuff, there are these people that attend to the person going through the initiation who sort of like help them out and are like, they're make sure they're cool. It's like if you're going to have like a heroic dose of mushrooms, you might want to like arrange for a spotter to hang out with you while you're completely out of it, rather than do it alone. Sort of that kind of sequence. And then because we get like with the Grimorium Verum spirit, the spirit Guland, who causes or heals sickness. And you offer them singed bread, which is interesting because it's almost like edible charcoal, or like to calm your stomach after you have eaten poison, And then the Eshu from Kimbanda that syncretizes there is Eshu Morchego, which means the bat Eshu. And that Eshu is thought to be an alchemist who like is kind of crazy ass and sometimes blows stuff up, like kind of like has like mad scientist experiments. So, but an alchemist is someone who might be making medicine also, like a spagyric alchemist. And so we get this like, and charcoal compound is like one of the three things in spagyrics is reducing to ash. And then we get this singed bread, and we get like treating someone who's been like ingested poison, and we get them like, like helping someone out and giving them the milk or whatever. But even in the nakshatras, we get shatabisha, which is means requiring 100 physicians. So again, we get this we get another direct like line over to like really odd, not like it's more direct to, this happens a lot, that it's more direct to the verum than it is to anything else,
Can I just say something for a second?
Oh yes, yeah, take over.
Yeah, so I was just thinking, because it's lightning, and because let's say you're having like you were using the example of like being initiated and then seeing things, or seeing into the mystery, or having like a trip and kind of talking to something that is, that you would not see in normal life. But this full moon, like probably most of the people won't be having like a crazy like drug induced initiatory vision, but there's something about the end of the month where things get revealed, and I feel like we might get a glimpse of something behind the scene, maybe on a mundane level more so than just like extreme example, for example, but because we have Mercury opposing Pluto a few days later and stuff. So it's a time of revelation and secret reveal, or maybe something that you're not supposed to know or see, that kind of initiates you into that state that you were speaking about. And because Garland comes after lightning, the Lunar Mansion 25, which is a place of waiting, or really even feeling stuck. It's almost like something that is revealed, or this kind of lightning strike that reveals something, and then you're kind of like frozen, you're kind of frozen or stuck, or realize that you're more stuck, or that there's something kind of immovable about what's revealed.
Yeah.
I'm just applying it to like right now,
No, I
mundane,
think
because
it makes sense because it really lines up on both levels, because we also get Mars triggering the Saturn earlier in the month, like now, but we get Mars triggering the Saturn Uranus square, and Uranus being like high voltage, and Uranus like being Promethean, and just like putting the be like secrets revealed. Here's how you make fire, humans. Like all of that stuff. And so there is something of this month that does look like cat's out of the bag, and it's shocking to a lot
Jupiter
of people.
returns to Aquarius a few days after the full moon too. So there's really a switch of guard, a switch of narrative after that full moon. So even though that full moon in lightning is associated with this sort of initiatory, experience, I feel like if we apply it to the context of what's going on right now, I feel like that initiation might be sort of something regarding perhaps like the lockdowns and the way things have been managed or something. That's my speculation.
No, totally. I think there's going to be like, it's going to happen on the macrocosmic level, it's going to happen on the personal level, and then on the lunar zodiacal level, it'll happen on a hermetic level as well, rather than just.
And that hermetic level might be that new, like these new elements, change, like it's something that changes your perception of things, like very simply put, something kind of lighting up that changes your perception of things. But we're talking about a place that is not, lightning in the end of the lunar zodiac, like this is, the very last few places on the lunar zodiac. There's something very initiatory, but there's also something that is impersonal, it's there's detachment here, it's not like
because it hooks you up to the deity, and that's it. Can every initiative is hooked up. It's like no longer a personal experience or something.
So we were talking about the new moon being in like connected to this place in some ways, but if we look at the new moon on June 9th, it's a lot more sort of personal body desires, and then as we move and progress through the month, it becomes a lot more of this sort of like, it could even be just like, oh, you have a dream, and through that dream you understand something that just like changes the whole equation, but it's kind of detached from your immediate sort of fulfilling of desires. It's more like a big overarching mystical experience.
The whole progression from like a kind of like, because we often give like a kind of like, well, here's all the archetypes, so what are you going to do with them other than keep your eyes peeled for them, is sort of like some magical orientation too. And it looks like, some sort of like deep internal primordial trance dance works for the new moon, some sort of like little not little diminutive, almost little like petite Albert, little like little like crossroads, like devil deal type thing for some throwing some tricks for the conjunction of Venus and Mars that has this makes me think it almost has like side effects, like how sometimes you're like, I did this little spell to just get like an extra couple $100 this month because I could use it. But the side effect was that something really weird and anomalous and phenomenological and profound happened that changed your idea of like what reality looks like in the process. Because sometimes that happens where you do magic for like a mundane end, but the way in which it all comes about is really bizarre, and that lightning is almost kind of like the like, yeah, here's maybe what you asked for, or maybe not, but here's like some unexpected sparks anyway.
The sun will be in Horus Mansion, which is kind of like a switchboard anyway, and then the moon in lightning, it's really there's like something that like a switch that turns on and a switch that turns off or something. We're really kind of like the gears are just changing into a different direction because of an additional information or something.
Yeah, that is weird that it's Horse, because if the point of the initiation is to see the deity, and Horse is relates to Skirlin and the one who brings the others in, it's sort of just like, all right, are they ready? And like they're like, yeah, they're ready. Open the window, open the viewing window, and it's like
Yeah.
boom, like how
And
they go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say, like, because Mercury opposed Pluto, and Mercury has been in poor condition for like a while. It's strong in Gemini and stuff, but it's been squaring Neptune, and I just feel like Mercury entering Cancer and then opposing Pluto is just like, it's a completely different perspective on things, and it's timed with this like lightning full moon. So there's a switch of perspective, whether it's micro or macro. Some things come to light. It might not be necessarily like surprising, like Uranian type surprise, but it's almost like, oh, okay, that's a different angle.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting too, like that they say, if you read the Orphic hymns, they always end with this like petition of like, well, give me a good life and a good death. But these are initiates on the path of the mysteries, and there's, you'll see it said when talking about these kinds of traditions back then in ancient material, that they're like, well, you can't really live a great life until you've been initiated. You just kind of live a base existence, and it really gets good once you kind of like have been initiated and you see the other side. And so when I see here that it's like increasing merchandise and profit and the talisman for increasing herds, and you use a ram horn, or it says if it's a bullhorn if you keep cows instead of sheep or whatever. But it seems like it's like related back to what we were talking before about abundance, but maybe not basic bitch abundance. It's like meaningful stuff. Like, how sometimes you look at all the possessions in your life, and some of them resonate, like they're real, and like some of them are just like stuff, and you could almost like weed out the stuff and end up with just these almost like only be surrounded by power objects, and like like the land you live on, and like the stuff you have all kind of resonates with this, like it has divine quality. I don't know, I feel like there's something about like a changeover of like being in a relationship with being in the world that goes both ways through materialism, like inside and outside of you, that if you're surrounded by a resonant existence or something.
So that's for the full moon.
Yeah, or just kind of how they all add up. Like it's almost like if you align yourself with the snake dance to like like be like, well, what do I want besides just like basic fulfillment? What is like my being trying to create? And then you kind of like do some trickery to try to like facilitate that coming about. At this point, the full moon makes stuff obvious. Like you could really be kind of shocked to find out like where things are at this point, and like this kind of a lightning flash of realization of what's about you.
Yeah, and what I was getting at, I guess, earlier when I was talking about this late part of the lunar zodiac is that, the first part of the lunar zodiac, we're seeing animals, we're seeing a lot more like material embodiment. But when we get to that point here, there's something outside of the self,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I was saying like it's really, even when I look back into the channeled writing and the drawings and stuff, these places are really like they change a lot. They're very changeable. There's core signification, but the way it looks will look different. Just like when they say when you die, you see what you believe in,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
basically, if whatever you believe in when you die, that's what you see. And I find like this place here is really kind of like that. It's whatever illumination or what gets lit up is really depending on like where your perception mind stands.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like something that kind of alters the perception here, but that
It's
perception is anchored in what your whole beliefs.
Yeah, totally. No, I completely agree with that. Because like even in the mysteries, they weren't all to one deity. They're typically like Dionysian, but there's other, there's the mysteries of Isis. There's, like um, people are going to kind of.
Yeah, that's what I was going to tell you earlier. It's like initiation, like when you said, you haven't lived once as long as you haven't really glimpsed at the mystery or whatever, but that is also very, that's going to be really highly it's not like everybody can agree on that or what that looks like.
Yeah, it's going to be really different, but there's this sort of like shared
Fundamental
yeah,
core,
fundamental
yes.
human experience. The other thing that I was thinking about is like, because we're talking about the 24th shape, but this is also Aquarius, and we get an Aquarius full moon every year at this end of the year because the sun is in Leo. And thinking about just kind of like, oh well, it's summertime, people are like tending to be out more, visible more, in the mix more, blah blah blah. And then you get kind of burnt out on all this activity, and it makes sense for an Aquarius full moon to show up in the middle of all that, because there comes a moment where you need to kind of go off the map. Like it makes sense in tandem with Leo too. Like if Leo is like all about being yourself, then you're so willing to be yourself that you're willing to go out on a limb and follow your own ideas and no one else's in an Aquarius type fashion. But this kind of takes you out to like the frontier and to the lonely road for, or even if it's just for an evening of like a moon illuminated like walk away from everybody else. But that's also the same kind of space for this kind of a epiphany to hit you. You could be wandering the hillside by yourself and get hit with that lightning bolt.
Or something drives you to walk away.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Something like a circumstance or something drives you to feel alienated or
Yeah, and you're
like,
like, fuck this, I'm out of here.
yeah, exactly. Which is just like very typical Aquarius. But I just feel like this place, there's a quality of kind of new information or new perception. It's like it's about perception, and that's really depending on where the light is shining, like it's almost like multifaceted. And but there's something about perception here and kind of stepping out of your familiar perception and then seeing something else.
Yeah, it's interesting because like Horus being on the other end of the axis, and one of the natures of what it seems like they're talking about by putting Horus there is that horses to that part of the Mediterranean came from elsewhere. They came down from the steppes and through like the Babylonian lands and through Persia into the Mediterranean. They came with foreigners. And so it's just this kind of like where with Horse, you get the influx of the foreign, and then with lightning and it being embedded in Aquarius, you get the sort of like moving out into a like unfamiliar territory.
Yeah, even though these places are very fixed. So it's, there's like still a lot of fixity. It's like, I feel like, again, I'm jumping into the solar zodiac, but I feel like, Aquarian in general, there's a fixity of vision or perception. It's like, yeah, like when we talk about fixed signs, it's like there's a stubbornness about a position, like it's like I'm taking this stance. This is what I think, this is what I believe in. So it's kind of paradoxical because we have this like very fixed place, but with the lightning mention, there's also an initiation to like deeper understanding that might require that you actually step away from that fixed stance.
Yeah. Yeah, I think fixed Aquarius is sort of like Aquarius is known for being idiosyncratic, but then because it's fixed, it's like they're always idiosyncratic.
Yeah.
Like they'll you're like, okay, well let's just get cheeseburgers for the night. And they're like, oh, that's so conventional. You're like, well, can't we don't have to be unconventional all the time. It's weird because that goes back to like the basic bitch thing we were talking about before.
Yeah. Well, that's all I had to say anyway. I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, no, I think we totally covered it all. And I think there's, if you look just at the solar astrology, there's one set of circumstances, but I think it's really interesting always to look, obviously, because we do this, but look at the lunar zodiac, because you'll see a proliferation of something that just like might not got brought up there, and seeing this kind of like constantly getting reference to like increasing resource and well-being for some reason, and supporting you and bringing prosperity across like the three prominent points of this cycle of 28 is kind of a little secret mojo that I'm not really sure what we're going to get out of yet. We've said our piece and we're speculating, but good luck with whatever you're possessed with, and maybe we'll see. We'll be able to comment on how it goes next time. Bye.
Ciao. It's funny because you said good luck and it's like luckiest of the lucky.
Yeah.
I was kind of like tripping out on that for a second. I didn't know if you stopped recording.
No, I'm going to stop recording now. Thank you for listening to Liminal Light. You can find me at atavisceral.com, atavisceral.com, where I post forecasts and articles and offer astrological and divinatory services. For more discussions on the moon, go to lunarzodiac.com and sign up for our mailing list to find out about lectures, workshops, dreaming groups, events, appearances, publications, and whatever else. Now that the show is back on track, there's a bunch more guests lined up to discuss what is going on in the sublunar realm. We'll see you there.